Welcome to Davy's Take. Today we are talking about Godzilla x Kong, The New Empire, which I believe is the fifth film in this Godzilla Kong universe. I think. Two ancient titans, Godzilla and Kong, clash in an epic battle as humans unravel their intertwined origins and connection to Skull Island's mysteries. I said this in my Godzilla vs. Kong review, and I think in my Godzilla -1 review. I'm not really into the lore of Godzilla or Kong. I don't know all the characters. I don't know all the elements. It's all pretty new to me. That's something I really need to preference again, and we'll talk about that later. And I remember Godzilla vs. Kong was a movie that a lot of people were excited for. Not just fans of Godzilla and Kong. I think it was also just movie fans in general because it was a while since we got that theatrical event that everyone saw because of the pandemic. And I remember I had a pretty good time with that film. I remember it didn't really strike that balance well, though, of camping it up and still being a pretty good film. I remember it being just fine, but it was something that we needed. So I didn't really have much expectations for Kong x Godzilla Empire, or whatever the hell this movie's called. And I don't know where to begin with this film. This film and Godzilla vs. Kong have this interesting element to it where the movie does understand that the whole premise is ridiculous and we're just there to have fun. But for Godzilla x Kong Empire, I don't know if I can use that as an excuse anymore because I just thought this was a pretty bad film. It's hard to judge this film on the things that don't work because this film does fully understand it's supposed to be cheesy, it's supposed to be campy, we're supposed to just have fun. But the reason I feel like the film doesn't really work for me is it's just boring. It takes a long time to get to where we want to get. And for a movie like this, it's the monster fights that we're trying to get to. And that's the first thing I'll talk about that I liked. When we do get to the monster fights, they are a lot of fun. There are two exciting fight sequences with Kong. And I can't lie, when Godzilla and Kong are finally back on screen together, it's just a lot of fun. It's ridiculous, but you can't help yourself. It's pretty awesome. And that's why I go see a film like this. The spectacle, the crazy fights, the nonsense. The problem, though, it takes a while to get to those points. A lot of this movie is just exposition with those characters that we really don't care about. And I have to give the movie credit. They dialed back a little bit on the human characters. There's a lot less human characters in this film than previous films. And I know this movie's supposed to be ridiculous, but there are plot elements in here that are introduced that I think they went too far. Too far to the point where I was sitting there and I was like, I'm out. But then there are other plot elements that are introduced that I think work well because they expand the world. But I just don't know what they were thinking with some of those other ones. Someone in that writer room should have been, no, we are not doing this shit. It just felt like a lot of the plot elements here were just trying to get to that final monster fight so that we could just see all these crazy characters and things from the Godzilla lore that people will be like, ooh, I remember that. And like I said before, when we finally get to the last 15 minutes of the film, it is pretty fun. It is exciting. I can't lie. I had a good time at that point. But it's just getting there. It took so long. This movie's under 2 hours long, but definitely feels way longer than 2 hours. And I really think it has to do with just focusing on those human characters. I have to give the movie some credit, though, because a lot of it does feel like it is focused on Kong specifically. And there are elements about that I really liked. He meets this little ape, and there's this father-son dynamic there that was pretty touching. But then they just keep cutting back to these human characters that you really don't care about, and Godzilla's barely in the movie. He's just going from city to city, and our main characters don't seem too concerned about that, which I think is kind of alarming. There's so much collateral damage in this movie, and I get it, what are our main characters supposed to do about that? But the problem is, it just seems like they don't really care, especially in the beginning. Another thing that was surprising to me was some of the CGI was shoddy. Don't get me wrong, there are some shots that look really great when it's grand in scale, when they're fighting, it looks epic, especially in that IMAX format. But there are some smaller shots, when it's just characters talking, where I'm looking at it and I'm like, that's definitely a green screen. And I think this movie is going to be unfairly compared to Godzilla -1, since Godzilla -1 just came out and won an Oscar. And I think that's an unfair comparison because Godzilla -1 really focused on those human characters. That's what the movie was really about. And the Godzilla Kong movies definitely focus way more on the monster part of the films, which is totally fine. You can have both. It's not because one exists, you have to get rid of the other. It's kind of nice to think about. If they make sequels to Godzilla -1, we'll have this more serious, character-driven movies about Godzilla, and I think that's really great. And you could still have these campy, fun, ridiculous Kong Godzilla movies. But I guess if they keep making these Godzilla Kong movies with these really uninteresting human characters, then honestly, I don't really want to see a sequel. I think there's definitely a way to make these films better because it just seems like we're just wasting an hour and a half to get to those final fights with Kong and Godzilla and all these other monsters. And that's why it feels like this movie is kind of a waste of time. It just feels like they didn't know how to put things together to have this plot keep going with all these different elements and aspects. But the whole entire movie, the plot feels like it's just standing still. And like I said before, I don't know much about the lore of Kong or Godzilla, but if you're a big fan of those characters, I think there's plenty here you're going to enjoy. There's definitely a lot of fan service moments. There's definitely things that completely went over my head, and there's definitely things that are made that weren't made for me. And I'm all for fun, campy movies where you can just turn off your brain and enjoy yourself. But for me, Godzilla x Kong the New Empire just felt really boring, and that's just so weird to say. I'm gonna give Godzilla x Kong the New Empire 4.5 Davey Daves. Back-to-back Empire movies. I had Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, now I have Kong Godzilla Empire. So hopefully those are all the Empire movies that come out this year. So, Godzilla Kong, the New Empire. Let me know what you guys thought of it once you've seen it. I'm curious to hear. And thank you so much for watching. Click here to see more of Davey Dave's Takes.